So without dragging on the introduction side of things any further, it's now my pleasure to welcome Daniel Brown to the stage. Daniel's well known to many of you, I'm sure, and if not, make sure you do so. You go to Daniel over the next day or two. Daniel's a principal scientist at AGBU, has been for many years, and is a key part of the AGBU team developing the genetic evaluation models. But I guess more relevant to today, Daniel's also on a seconded basis, currently the manager of the Sheep Genetics Team, so looking after that group and driving the program in Armidale. The other aspect that I in particular work with Daniel in these days is we have a day of Daniel's time. We also bring into a program we call ARMTech, Advanced Livestock Measurement Technologies. It's a rural R&D for profit funded research program into objective technologies. And Daniel leads one of our programs of work, which is about how we can enhance the quality of data coming out of industry into genetic evaluation databases, very relevant in terms of how we might bring future data into LAMBPLAN and Merino Select. So no further ado, I'll hand over to Daniel to open the conference. Thank you, Daniel.
Thanks very much, Richard. So thanks everyone for making the time to be here for these 2 half-day sessions. We know there's lots going on in life, and we appreciate you make an effort to be here and make what now is our largest leading breeder ever, which is awesome. And I think we've worked very hard to develop a thought-provoking agenda that actually challenge you to think about what you need to do to breed for your future customer needs and think about your long-term breeding objectives. So we hope you enjoy that as we go through our proceedings. So, as Richard's already mentioned, we want to take the opportunity to celebrate where we've come from. What we do today is probably an evolution of at least 50 years, if not more, of some sort of performance evaluation. And we want to take time to go through that and actually celebrate where we've come and think about what we actually might do better in the future. And just as a small highlight of that, we'll talk much more about this tonight. There's been a lot of highlights along the way and a lot of people involved. And this image just captures some of the recent ones, and we'll talk about more detail tonight. But I just wanted to say thanks to everyone involved. There's been a large investment by breeders, industry, service providers and researchers, as well as the MDCs. And I think it's important to recognise that investment, and I just want to say thanks for your participation along that journey. And we'll talk more tonight. So I hope you enjoy. So today I'd like to take you through 3 key aspects. The first is a little update about sheep genetics, what our team looks like now, and some of our key activities. I'll then talk about our annual analysis enhancements in a little bit of detail, and finish off talking about some of the other R&D and associated projects that are becoming very important to sheep genetics over time. So I'll just touch quickly on our team, which I think is an important aspect, and we've had some changes recently. So this is our Sheep Genetics team. We sit in the wider genetics team within MLA. Most of you will know Fiona and Nicole running the office for us. We also have Ermias and Stephen are our database managers. But we've also had a new additional role created, which is a Senior Development Officer, which is a pretty significant step for sheep genetics. We've got more demands, and I think that's a reflection of that, and it's good to have Peter step up into that role, and she's doing a good job. And that's created 2 new positions for us in the development officer roles, and we have Emma McCrabb, our new Merino Select development officer, and James Taylor, and they're with us today. And it's good that we've, for the first time ever, I think we've got the whole team here at a leading breeder. So please make the time to introduce yourself, especially to Stephen. He doesn't join us very often, so it's a landmark thing for us. I also want to mention the wider genetics team. We work together on a daily basis, trying to optimise the outcomes of our investment in genetics for sheep genetics and industry. And it's really good to have those 3 people, ex-sheep genetics staff. Everyone will know Hamish. He's running the genetics program within MLA, supported by Carcase, who is the project manager and helping manage the larger variety of genetics projects that we've got now. And we've also got a new role, which is filled by Clara, which is a adoption genetics role, which is quite awesome, I think, for sheep genetics and the sheep industry. Having a dedicated person working on adoption in genetics and sheep and beef is a great advancement. And as I said, we're working together to deliver good outcomes for sheep genetics and the sheep industry. I haven't got time to talk about the details, but I just wanted to mention that we've observed some solid improvements in adoption and awareness of breeding values, both in the seed stock sector and also in the commercial ram buying sector. And we've heard some good examples of that over recent days. And I think that's led to solid growth in the membership of sheep genetics in terms of the number of flocks, but also the number of animals coming through the analysis every week is growing. So that's good signs for sheep genetics and the industry. And that obviously flows on to genetic progress, which I'll describe in a little bit more detail. I've just pulled out the genetic trends for 3 indexes out of the three main analyses, and you can see that we've got solid rates of genetic gain there in all those sectors. The thing I wanted to touch on briefly is that you can see that the rate of genetic progress is increasing over time, and that's an important target for us. This is a sheep genetics as a business unit. We're focused on the industry strategic plans, and the MISP has clear targets around genetic improvement. So we're trying to increase the rate of genetic gain, and I think that's being seen in those graphs. But there's plenty of room to do better, I think. I just want to talk briefly about a couple of key activities that were active in the sheep genetics space. The first one is a sheep genetics database redevelopment project, which we've been working on for some time. We have about 4 databases: the Merino Select, the LAMBPLAN, our resource flock and INF database, and our genomics database. They're all different databases, and they need to be brought up to speed and working together more efficiently. And this project will bring them together and develop new tools around them. And I'm pleased to say that we've just gone out to tender for that project, so that'll be starting very shortly, which is will lead to better ways to interact with our members, which is great. We've also got a project as part of the adoption team to revisit how we display breeding values on our website and how animals can be searched by seed stock and also ram buyers. And Clara will talk much more about that project, but she's leading that as part of the adoption program. We're also revising our content websites, all our online resources, so we're updating those and bringing them up to date and making a fresh new website. Another key part of our extension and adoption campaigns in recent times has been our ramping up genetic gain reports, which we deliver out to breeders more frequently now. We've been working on updating them so we can customise which index we use and also how we compare animals, how we compare flocks to the rest of the analysis. So our aim is to deliver them online so we can use them more easily and make them available to service providers and breeders. I think that'll make them much more useful. Finally, something I wanted to mention that I'm quite passionate about is a new data quality metric, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. I think it's pretty important for us to spend some time and develop a metric to better describe data quality. We know it varies between breeders, and it's also perceived, rightly or wrongly, mostly wrongly, by people outside sheep genetics as being a problem. And I think it's a way of us transparently telling people how good a job we're doing. Things are not always captured in breeding value accuracy, so we want to describe how well a flock is actually performance recording and recording data. Most other countries have something, and other species have something in this sense. We did once have data quality grades, but they've gone by the wayside over years, so I think it's time for us to invest in some R&D to develop a better metric and put that out there to industry to highlight how good a job we're actually doing on performance recording. And so far we've received good feedback from industry on that proposal. Another thing that it is a key issue, and we've just heard that mentioned in the CRC conference, is the transition from CRC, and we're actively working on that transition and developing a system where we can, without interruption to industry, continue the genomic pipeline in particular, but all the activities of the CRC in genetics and also meat science. So part of that system will be developing a way to interact with multiple service providers. We know there's multiple service providers that exist in the industry, and we want to encourage that. So we're developing standards and a system around those standards so we can interact with all retailers and deliver consistent outcomes back to breeders. So that's actively being worked on, and we'll hope to have that in place very shortly. So I guess in conclusion of our sheep genetics update, I think we've got a really good team and we're working together to try and deliver more resources and tools to support genetic progress in the industry. And I think we've made some good progress in recent years there. So I want to move now onto the analysis enhancements. So every year we make changes to the analysis to improve the way we're producing breeding values. This is important for us. It keeps us at the leading edge and allows us to evolve and make sure our breeding values are as good as they can be and relevant to the industry. And as in previous years, this year we're making some significant changes. I just wanted to reiterate that we go to a lot of trouble to test these changes and make sure that we're producing better breeding values for more animals. And I think as we go through these, I'll be able to highlight that. The 4 key things that we will be delivering this year are around new traits for reproduction rate, particularly in maternal breeds to start with. We've been working on these for a long time, and I'll talk more about those. We're also going to start using genomic information for more breeds. We're also refining indexes and reporting consistencies between pedigree and genomic information, and I'll step through each one of those. I won't talk about reproduction RBVs in much detail because Kim's going to talk at length tomorrow about those, but it gives me pleasure to say that they're going to be reported very soon. We've been working on this activity for a long time now, and it's good to see that come to fruition. So moving on to genomic information for more breeds. Currently, we only use genomic information for the major breeds where we've got lots of genotypes and lots of phenotypes. But we've been working on, through the R&D program, on a way to actually include genotypes from other breeds. So the main thing is that we've had to adjust the way we calculate the genomic relationship matrix. So currently we've been assuming essentially when we build that matrix that everything's the same breed. But we've developed a new technique to actually create a multi-breed GRM, which is an important step and will have an influence on breeding values, which I'll show you in a minute. But the main point to note is that most minor breeds don't have a lot of genotypes and phenotypes, so the value of genotyping is lower. But by including those in the analysis, we enable people to build their own reference population. So start genotyping and start getting some benefit from those, but the benefit will only become apparent when we've got lots of genotypes and phenotypes to underpin that genomic prediction. The other thing to note is that for some of the minor breeds, we'll have to genotype at a higher density platform. And we'll be coming out with recommendations around what density of genomic testing is required for each breed in the short term. Just to highlight what sort of impact that might have, I've just plucked one example here. This is breeding values for intramuscular fat. On the x-axis is the current terminal analysis, and then we're looking at the new analysis on the y-axis. The main point to take from that is there's not massive changes, but there are some changes. Because of those, the way we calculate a GRM has an influence on all animals. We will see some changes. But generally, the correlation across the analysis are very high. And even for the minor breeds, we still don't see a massive impact because we don't have a lot of genotypes and phenotypes in the same animals. If we look at accuracy, it's the same sort of graphs. We don't need to dwell on the detail except that we don't see a big benefit from using genomics in the smaller breeds. The accuracy hasn't changed much because of that same reason. So I want to move on now to our index refinements. There's 3 key things that we're working on. The first is the retirement of Carcase Plus and LAMB 2020, and I'll talk more about that in depth. The other 2 issues are a new index we've developed, particularly for the Corriedale breeders, but for all maternal breeders, around improving wool quality as well as all the other things in the current maternal indexes, and that's maternal wool index, so we're going to call it MWP+. We're also working on updating our index documentation. Our index has been developed over time and the documentation with it. So some of that now is quite old and we need to bring everything into line and make it all consistent, and also a better description of what the index is aimed at doing. So we're working on that, and we have some prototypes to go to consultation shortly. So we hope to have those delivered out to industry soon, so we've got more consistency of those index documentation. So to talk a little bit more about the retirement of Carcase Plus. This is a significant issue for us because we know Carcase Plus has been around for 20 years. The key issue is that across the whole of industry, we see that we've made really good progress for carcass weight and for lean meat yield. And there's some indication we're actually doing better for those than what we have been in the past. So what we can see is in recent times there's been more influence, more awareness of shear force and IMF, and we're starting to see those come back under control. But as an industry, we're still declining IMF, and if we use our knowledge of genetic parameters to look at our MSA grade or our eating quality, we still predict it to be declining across the whole industry. So we need to do a better job of managing that. We heard nicely from Dave and Alex and Mark yesterday about the importance of eating quality and how they see it in the future. And I think the willingness to pay data from MSA clearly illustrates to us that we need to maintain eating quality for the lamb industry. At the moment, we don't think we're actually maintaining. Some breeders and groups of breeders are doing a good job of maintaining or even improving eating quality, but as an industry, we're not yet doing that. One of the challenges is that Carcase Plus, because it's focused entirely on lean meat yield, is actually pushing eating quality back. So anyone using Carcase Plus in a ram breeding operation is actually having a negative impact on eating quality. We've been reviewing this with the technical and advisory committees, as well as AgBill and Sheep Genetics, and we all recommend updating this index. So Andrew Swan's helped us develop a new index, which is very similar to Carcase Plus, driving lean meat yield, but also aimed at maintaining eating quality. That new index we're going to call Terminal Carcass Production, TCP, which is essentially a revised Carcase Plus to maintain eating quality. So just to summarise the difference between those two indexes, there's a couple of key points I wanted to demonstrate. I've just plotted here the predicted 10-year response to selection using Carcase Plus, and the main thing is that while it's driving lean meat yield, the blue bar's in a positive direction, our predicted response in terms of MSA grade or eating quality is negative. And if you're using genomics, it's actually more negative, which you're getting more progress for lean meat yield. So that's not a desirable outcome for industry. If we look at the new index, TCP, we see that we're getting similar responses for lean meat yield, but we're maintaining basically eating quality. If you're using genomics, we're actually slightly improving eating quality. So that's a much more balanced response for industry. That being said, the index is different. As I said, Carcase Plus is an older index developed as desired gains. So the units are quite different to our current standard indexes. And you see that if I compare to eating quality here, the new index, which is a dollar-based index, is more in line with our other existing sheep object indexes. That means that the correlation is basically high, but a long way from 1, and also the variation and the mean of the index is going to be different. So it is a significant issue for us to be managing with the industry and our ram buyers. So we have developed a transitional plan to roll out the new index via Sheep Genetics. So TCP will be appearing on our reports, but we will make Carcase Plus available for a transition period of 12 months to help ram selling, basically. We were actively working on developing communication plans and material for breeders so that we can help support the re-education of ram buying clients, which is probably the biggest issue for us. So I guess now I'd like to make a personal request. As leading breeders, I'd like to ask you to help us mentor with your peers and also your ram buying clients this process. It's an important process for us to look into the future and think about eating quality, and we know we need to make this change, and we'd like your support and help to make the change with industry. So the final thing about analysis enhancements I wanted to briefly mention was the reporting of inconsistencies between the pedigree and genomic information. Now more animals are being genotyped, we can actually compare what the pedigree says to what the genotypes tell us about relationships. I'd like to use a small example, a real life example we had to deal with recently to highlight what we can do. So this is an example of 15 sons of a sire, and based on the pedigree, the pedigree confirmed that they were a progeny of this sire. When we look at the genomic information, we see this bottom animal actually looks not to be related, not to be a direct progeny of that sire. So we can use that information and compare all other animals that were sires in that drop, who were also, in this case, also genotyped, and we're able to find that sire 11 actually looks like the sire of that 15th progeny. So that's the sort of thing we can do. We can identify inconsistencies between the pedigree and the genomics, and then in some cases where we've got more genotypes available, we can actually go looking for the correct sire. So these sort of inconsistencies should be fixed for the analysis. So we're about to start reporting those back to breeders and working through the process of actually fixing them or identifying what the correct solutions might be. So I guess there's a range of key changes there, particularly introducing more breeding values from a genomic selection point of view for the minor breeds, but also changes to Carcase Plus. They're all aimed at producing better breeding values for more animals, I guess, for us into the future. So I'd like to just finish off by talking about some of the associated genetics projects that are active at the moment. I think personally the landscape has evolved a bit for sheep genetics, and if we just think about the last day with the CRC conference, for those that were there, how many times were RBVs or sheep genetics mentioned? I think nearly every talk referred to genetics in some way, and I think that just highlights how sheep genetics is an important part of the industry now, and also a delivery mechanism for a lot of the outcomes of particularly genetics projects. So a lot of those projects are collaborative, both with industry and other research groups, and a lot of them involve producers directly, contributing their own time and investments into the process. And I think we're doing a lot more projects with supply chains as well. So I think they're all positive things, but it means that sheep genetics and MLA play an important coordination role, and we spend a lot more of our time actually working to make sure we've got good outcomes across all those projects for sheep genetics and the sheep industry. And I'd like to just highlight a few of those projects now, which a lot of them will form parts of the agenda over the next day. So MLA have a range of investments in sheep genetics. I'd just like to talk about a couple of those. The NLGC, National Livestock Genetics Consortium, is a skills-based task force that reviews all the genetics projects. So through that process, MLA has got some key investments, particularly for sheep genetics, is the ongoing funding of the resource flock. We've recently secured several more years of that key investment for sheep genetics. Around that, we're also investing in more eating quality, so we're actually century testing more lambs, which will be important for our eating quality breeding objectives. We've also got investments around genomic prediction, so doing a better job of using genomic information into the future, for example. There's also some MLP add-on projects there that go through that process. So some key investments for sheep genetics that were involved in there. I won't talk too much about adoption, but MLA have ramped up the adoption team, and in particular genetics, and we're working actively with Clara and the team to deliver outcomes there. And I'll let Clara talk more about that tomorrow. Another key aspect is our investment through the donor company. There's been a lot of private investment through the donor company by leading groups or breeders. We'll hear about several of these projects throughout the agenda. And I think they're a really good investment, and it's great for us to be delivering those with sheep genetics. There's another recent program, the Producer Innovation Fast Track program, where we've seen, again, progressive breeder groups investing their own money in various projects, mostly around genotyping and phenotyping to get more data to drive breeding programs. But sheep genetics have been actively involved in the delivery of those programs, and I think it's been a significant thing for sheep genetics and also industry. Obviously, AWI also have a lot of investment that influences sheep genetics. In particular, obviously, the MLP project will deliver lots of good outcomes for sheep genetics and the sheep industry. There's obviously been a lot of research in fly strike and maternal efficiency, as well as the ongoing investment in AMSIA, which we're involved with on a regular basis. We've also obviously been working heavily with the CRC. The CRC's helped deliver a lot of tools and resources and development for us, and it's been a good relationship. We've heard a lot about that in the last day, but in particular things like developing tools around the use of genomics and also genomic products, helping us deliver better breeding values for reproduction, as well as breeding program design tools, working with breeders to work out how best to drive genetic progress into the future. And there's also other investments, international investments in this case. New Zealand Merino are working with AgBee to develop breeding values for foot rot, which should have some significant implications for sheep genetics in New Zealand and hopefully in Australia in the long term. So that's just a summary of the active projects or recent projects in the sheep genetic space, and I think it does highlight all the exciting stuff that's going on out there around the sheep genetic space. So we spend a lot of time collaborating across that space to ensure that we get the best outcomes we can for sheep genetics and the sheep industry. So in conclusion, I guess my summary is that we've got a bigger and better team, and we're actively working on new products and more products to help foster genetic improvement across the industry. We're implementing in April this year some key enhancements to the analysis, all aimed at producing better breeding values for more animals. And finally, I think there's lots of exciting collaborative R&D out there which will help us continue our process of continual improvement as we've seen for the last 50 odd years. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. We've got time for a question or two, which should pop up on the board here shortly. So, Daniel, we've come a long way in the 30 years of evaluation. After this year, what's on the cards in regards to analysis development?
Yeah, that's a good question. The two key things that come to mind are what we heard about before about big data and new genomic technologies. I think genomics will continue to get cheaper and we'll see more people genomic testing, and that'll have to be incorporated in analysis. And we're already working on ways to incorporate more genomics at higher density or in different ways on more animals. And that will be a challenge technically for us. And also I think we'll see ram breeding evolve more as a result. The second one would be more data from supply chains as well, which we'll hear from Sarita about later in the agenda.
So I could interpret that, Daniel, there's potential to keep increasing the rate of genetic gain above what's already been achieved.
That's it. Thank you.
Okay, time for one more. We'll take the top one there, Daniel. What will you be doing in terms of providing material to support the clients in the introduction of the new index? An important one to help industry transition.
Correct. We obviously need a good communication plan, and we're actively working on documentation to describe why we need to change the indexes, how they've changed, and what the implications are. So we've already started developing a one-pager to go out to ram buying clients and also to ram breeders as part of that process.
Okay, we'll just squeeze the last one in quickly, Daniel, around a best practice manual to support the better data quality standards.
Yes, we've actually been struggling with we've had a ram breeders manual for some time now that we've been working on updating for probably 10 years now, and I think it's a bit challenging to succinctly put all the complexities of having a good breeding program design and good data collection standards. And I think we're looking at new ways to actually put that material available, whether it be online or in different training materials, but we definitely need to document that better and get something out to industry. But we haven't actually been able to work out what that should look like at this point in time.
Okay, so I'll interpret that again as open to feedback to help Daniel and the team develop their thinking. So if you join me in thanking Daniel for that presentation, please.